I'll turn it over to you. What do you want? We have an alum here this morning, a young man named Evan Rice, graduated in 2004, has done some really interesting things since he graduated. Please give him a warm welcome.
All right, thank you. Okay, so what I thought I'd do today is talk a little bit about travel, a little bit about writing, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. As Mr. Ledyard said, my name's Evan Rice, and I'm a traveler and a writer. My latest book is called The Wayfarer's Handbook, a field guide for the independent traveler. It was published about a year ago. I thought I'd give some brief background of kind of my career up to this point, and I thought I would start here. So this is me in this room about 15 years ago, probably after a lame assembly by a boring alumni. I was in the class of 2004. We were really good at football, no thanks to me, and we all wore Hawaiian board shorts to prom. It was pretty cool. From here, I went on to SMU in Dallas, Texas, where I was a double major in finance and economics. And after college, I moved to Washington, D.C., and joined a consulting company. I worked there for a couple years, and I just turned 25 when I decided to quit my job and travel full-time. Now, travel was something I'd been interested in for a long time. I traveled internationally with my family when I was younger. I'd studied abroad in college, and I had a sense of how big the world is and how little of it I'd seen. But the other side of that coin was that life was really good in D.C., and it was difficult to think about leaving all that behind. So if there was one thing that really pushed me over the edge, it would be this. This is the Great Migration of African wildebeest, and every year more than 1 million of these wildebeest move through East Africa, affecting all these other animals as they go. So I was thinking about travel, and when I looked at the calendar, I realized, hey, if I really get serious about this, I could go see this year. Not on planet Earth, not on YouTube, I could actually go see that. That became a real helpful, motivating factor in my mind. It gave me something to put on the calendar that turned this kind of theoretical idea of like, oh, I'm just going to pack up all my stuff and go see the world, and that helped me kind of translate that into a realistic goal. So I made the decision to go travel. I left the US and the adventure began. Now this idea of independent travel or a gap year or backpacking is a little bit more popular in other parts of the world, especially Europe. And people really do this in all different ways. Some people go out and teach English, people join the Peace Corps, volunteer. For some people it's just like a 2-week thing between jobs. For others, they go for years at a time. It's really a full range. I've traveled with people who were teenagers up to their 80s. There's a lot of different kinds of people out on the road. So because the really concept is not as popular here, I'll give you a quick overview of kind of how this whole thing works. One of the big points here is that you travel pretty light. You really want to carry everything you need in just like a big backpack. You realize quickly what's important. The whole idea here is really based on movement and kind of total freedom. So you don't want to be tied down by lugging around a bunch of stuff. So you really fit everything into packs this size, and that's just what you use. The next big thing is the idea of the hostel. Like a lot of people ask, how do you meet people? Or, man, I'd love to do that, but I don't have anyone to go with. I'd be alone all the time. The answer to all those questions is really the hostel. These kind of informal hotels, kind of traveler hotels. It's a very inclusive community. Like everybody's looking to meet other people. And a lot of the travelers stay in these same few hostels in whatever city you're in. So that's really where you kind of meet up with people, and that's how you really don't travel alone. You just meet everyone at the hostel. And that really brings me to my next point, which is the crew. This is probably my favorite part of travel. You form these incredible international crews of other travelers. You just sort of team up and take on the world together. A really cool thing about traveling like this is that it's sort of this cultural multiplier in a way. Like wherever you are and wherever you're exploring, you're not only there, you're exploring with all these other people from all these other different countries. Like I was in Peru a couple years ago, and it was me, and it was great to see Peru, but I was also with all these Israelis and Dutch and Irish people. And so it's sort of like you're fully immersed in Peruvian culture, but you're also exposed to all this other stuff. So that's really the basics of travel. So I flew to Nairobi, Kenya, and I was scared and inexperienced and didn't know anything. And I went out on safari and saw those wildebeest, and it exceeded every expectation. From there, I knew I really couldn't stop, and I fell in love with the open road. I was gone for years. I'm actually not going to talk too much about my own travel experiences. There's not enough time to really scratch the surface of any of these countries, and this really isn't about what I've done. It's more about what you can do. But I do want to talk about 3 major characteristics about the world in general, and I'll show some of these photos as I do that. So characteristic 1 here is just that the world is wonderful. I mean that in every conceivable way. There's a lot of people who want you to believe that the world, especially anywhere outside of the United States, is this really terrifying and scary place. Sometimes if you watch the news, it makes it seem like everything's going wrong and that anywhere outside your neighborhood there's these bad people. A lot of people demonize the idea of the unknown. They want you to think that people, especially foreign people, are fundamentally scary and different and out to get you. Some of the people that tell you that kind of stuff are just ignorant. Some of them are scared, and some of them are just consciously lying. But it doesn't matter because they're all wrong. People are lovely. The world is awesome. There's some dangerous places out there, that's true, but there's dangerous places here too. Don't be reckless, don't be dumb, but know that the world is a wonderful place and it's full of wonderful people. Point 2 is just that the world is accessible. There's something few travel writers will tell you, and that's just that travel is not that complicated. You really don't need any book to travel, though if you want one, the Wayfarer's Handbook is very good. But people love to overcomplicate the idea of exploration. It's actually really simple. You pack a bag and you go somewhere. Like all this stuff, you can just go do this. You don't need a lot of money. You don't need equipment. Especially now with smartphones, you can book a flight and a hostel almost instantly. You need to save money before you go, but a whole lot less than you'd think. You know, I'm not saying you should do this. I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm just saying that independent travel is a much more accessible option than a lot of people give it credit for. And then the last just overall characteristic of the world I want to touch on is just that the world is really infinite. There's more out there than you can possibly imagine. You know, like this is a desert in the middle of Vietnam. These are geothermal vents in Bolivia. This is Huacachina, the city in the sand in Peru, where you can go sandboarding. Like, there's all this unexpected, really cool stuff around every corner, and it's stuff that you don't really hear about. It's stuff that you might not know about, but it's everywhere. I've traveled for years, and I've barely seen anything. I always think that this bird really encapsulates this point. You can't see it as much here, but this is a blue-footed booby. I took this photo on an island off the coast of Ecuador. And the feet of this bird are like almost neon blue. It's incredible to see in real life. And you know, when I came across this, you look at this and it's weird and exotic and almost kind of hilarious. It looks like something a kid would draw. Like the fact that there are things like this crazy looking bird flying around this island thousands of miles away from here, this is really one of the main reasons that I travel. Like, how many more beautifully weird things do I not know about? Like, I just want to go find and collect and see all this stuff. And so that's really my point here, is that there's more of this cool stuff out there than you can possibly imagine. And you know, it's a great time going to look for it. So those are my big overall characteristics about the world. I want to pause here and just talk about the overall idea of doing something unconventional. You know, it's easy to say, especially in settings like this, oh yeah, you know, I quit my job and went traveling, or I wrote this book. The truth is, I was totally terrified when I was doing those things. Anytime you do something outside the mainstream, big or small, there's a lot of that pressure and stress and fear, both internal and external. So when I thought about traveling like this initially, I didn't know how long I'd be gone, and I was certainly nervous about how everything would go. But in a general sense, I was excited by this feeling of limitless possibility and this kind of hope of a great adventure. So internally, I felt pretty confident that this is something I wanted to pursue, but that's really only part of the equation when you do stuff like this. There's also all that external pressure. Like, what are people going to think? What if I quit my job and pack up all my stuff and like tell all my friends goodbye, and I fly to Africa and then I can't handle it? And, you know, I come back after a week. It's the same thing when you're pursuing something creative, like writing a book. There's a huge amount of that external pressure involved. Like, oh man, everybody knows that I'm going for this. Everybody knows that I'm trying to do this. What if I screw this up? Like, won't that be so embarrassing? Like, won't people make fun of me? Let me tell you something you realize after doing something like this. That internal part is really all that matters. Don't worry about that external pressure. If you're good to go internally, no matter what it is, if you're kind of like, I'm into this, like I think this is cool, that's it. You're good to go. I know that's like easier said than done. I certainly get that. But just know that striving for things in life is what makes life interesting, and people respect people who own what they're into. Be the person who does things and goes for stuff, and no matter the outcome, people are going to respect you a whole lot more. All right, so by this point, I'd been on the road for a couple years, and I was looking like a total hippie. I was also really low on money. But I began to notice a couple things about the travel scene in general as I kind of bounced around all these countries. The first point was that it seemed to me that people didn't really want to be told where to go. Like this idea of a classic guide that says, you know, go here, like here's the best restaurant in Nairobi, all that kind of stuff. In my experience, people were just talking to each other for one, and that there was a lot of that information online for free, so why would people buy a book about that? The second thing was how much technology had changed travel. People your age know this better than anyone, but you're not ever really going to be able to beat the internet at providing a certain kind of information. Like people will always just go online. Everybody has smartphones now. So those are two of the big concepts I was thinking about, that the internet had really begun to dominate this idea of telling people where to go. So those were two of my big concepts, and then this was some of the inspiration. So this is kind of an overall point for anybody thinking about being a writer or really doing anything creative, is that you really want to read a lot. You want to consume a lot. That's really how you learn. With writing, one of the ways you start out is just by doing bad imitations of your favorite writers. And that's what I did. So for me, that was something like Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I love that book. I like it because it's so clever and weird and original, and it's just about infinite curiosity. Another thing that inspired me was these old field guides and old maps. I just liked that stuff artistically. I just thought it was cool. So when you're doing something like this, it can be very easy to get caught up in like trying to fit everything into a bigger plan, you know, like what's all this for? What is this going to be? Why am I working on this? And I certainly get that it's natural to ask those questions, but early on, especially at your age, you really don't need to have those answers. So like when I was starting out with the Wayfarer's Handbook, I certainly didn't know any of that. It was very much like, I like traveling, and I think that these kind of general concepts are accurate, and I like, you know, these books and these maps. Like, I don't know what this is. I'm just into this kind of thing. And so from there, I started fitting things into place. I started realizing, okay, well, people don't really want to be told where to go anymore. That Lonely Planet concept, that's kind of fading. So I won't do that. I won't give anybody any destination-specific information. Instead of telling people where to go, I'll give them the information they need to go anywhere. And then, you know, I'll keep the whole thing really fun and light, like in tone, you know, like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Like I'll do it in that kind of vibe. And then I'll do the artwork like all these old books and maps that I like so much. So that's really how this stuff comes together. Like early on, it can be overwhelming to be like, oh, how is this all going to work out? But you really don't need to know that. You just get a bunch of stuff that you like, read a lot, consume a lot, and then you kind of come up with your own take on things. So once I developed a lot of those ideas, I started writing letters to literary agents, and I signed with Thompson Literary. From there, we found a publisher in Black Dog and Leventhal. And then I've been lucky enough to have my work appear in outlets like the Wall Street Journal. Sometimes people send me photos of the book in cool locations. That's always fun. And then we have our Korean version coming out soon. They're translating it now. So these are some of the highlights that came from doing something unconventional. It's not even really highlights. These are almost like the side effects of following a passion. Like, you don't make a choice to do this kind of stuff. You make a choice to follow your passion, and then this sort of stuff kind of happens along the way. In closing, I'd just like you to remember three things. Remember that the world is accessible, wonderful, and infinite, as I talked about. Second, remember that exploring the world is an option. That's really all I'm saying. It's just an option. It's not for everybody. I'm not saying you should definitely do this. I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm just saying exploration is an option in all its limitless forms. Maybe that's studying abroad in college. Maybe that's volunteering somewhere overseas. Maybe that's working and saving money and going on these little week-long adventures, whatever. It costs money, and it's not always easy, but if it's something you're into, there's few things better. That's all I'm saying. And my third and final closing thought here is just, please believe me that there's nothing cooler in this world than people who are proud to be different and who are genuinely passionate about things. It's so easy to be cynical, and cynicism makes you boring. Be passionate and be different, and you will live a far more fulfilling life. Thanks very much. Okay, right here. Oh, sorry, him first and then you. Sorry. Yeah, you go, you go. Yeah, so that's a good question. So from an overall perspective, you know, you can plan and plan and plan. I never think that, you know, you want to plan too much, like you don't want to decide your trip before you go. I would say overall, from a really general perspective, is just choosing the types of places you want to go. Like when I was thinking about this stuff, I realized pretty early that like basically anywhere in Scandinavia, Europe, Russia, that was probably out of my price range. And so I quickly narrowed in on like Southeast Asia, East Africa, parts of South America is kind of where I would think about. and then I would just start reading about those places, and you quickly pick up, there's a lot of kind of traveler trails in these countries. And so just from limited research, you can sort of see what other travelers have done. And then, yeah, it's really like just taking the leap, honestly. It's you know, as I said, you can over-plan, but it's, for me, like that idea of putting something on the calendar, like that Great Migration of Wildebeest, that only happens at a certain time of year. And so once you really put something like that on the calendar, you work and build towards that, get an overall budget, and then it's just booking that plane ticket is really how you do it. What about back there?
Hi, I'm Nicholas Ponegera. I'm a junior. I was just wondering, as somebody who struggles learning other languages, would if I adjusted, would that be too much of a barrier that would overcome?
So that's a great question. I'm also terrible with languages, so you'll be good to go. It's funny, the world today, a lot of people, especially younger people, are learning English. Like being a native English speaker puts you in a great position. It used to be all these foreign, especially children, would have watched Friends. Now it's more How I Met Your Mother. But the amount of like people I've met in other countries who just watch How I Met Your Mother and have a basic idea of English would really shock you. It's no, English is very much the standard language. I always say, and I talk about this in the book, that you should get you should know the really basic hello, thank you, you know, like shows of respect wherever you are. You should have that down, and you should be learning as much as you can as you go. But as long as you have the general kind of like know how to say hello, know how to say thank you, know how to say can we please speak in English, you can really find your way from there. Like I've been in a couple situations where it's been dicey, and then it'll be like some 6-year-old kid who's just been binging How I Met Your Mother who like shows up and translates. It's awesome, but you'll be fine. What about right here? So that's a great question. Yeah. So I would say the first point there is really what I talked about earlier in terms of choosing your countries. Like I had a slide in a different presentation, but it just shows like for the amount of money it would take to travel maybe a week in a place like Spain or England, you can maybe do a couple months in like Cambodia, for instance. So what you quickly realize is just how much cheaper some of these places are. Another big point is how to save money on the road. You know, like when you first start out, you spend a lot of stupid money, but you quickly realize like there's some kind of cost-saving techniques. You can stay in these dorms instead of private rooms, all these different things. But yeah, so for me personally, I saved a lot of money from the consulting days, and then in between trips, I would get sometimes little like day jobs to build up money. But it really takes a lot less money than you would think, is what I'd say. And then a lot of people work on the road. You know, like a lot of these hostels that I talked about, those are staffed mostly by travelers who are just kind of moving on. A lot of people farm, a lot of people do these different things. But there's a lot of options to do that, and teaching English is big too. Yeah.
I'm Zachary Franks, I'm a junior. What is your favorite place that you've been to, and then what place are you planning on going to next?
That's another great question. In terms of favorite place, a metaphor I use a lot, it's not perfect, but like, you know how people sometimes with bands, like with music, everybody wants to be the guy that's like, oh yeah, I saw them when they like played some small bar and now they're like this big band. You know, like everybody wants to be the hipster that was into it before it was cool. Like I sometimes think about that with countries. I really like countries that have just, maybe like 10 years ago might have been too dangerous to travel in, but are just kind of opening up, but don't have as much of a touristy scene, you know? So like, in the past couple of years, places like Mozambique, places like Colombia, you know, that have had a lot of problems in the past, but are now mostly good to go from a traveler perspective in terms of this kind of stuff. So those are places that I really like. I'd say Colombia, Mozambique, northern Malaysia was great. In terms of where to go next, I want to go everywhere. I'd love to go to Guatemala, Honduras. I'd love to do the Trans-Siberian Railroad across Russia. I love trains. Trains are my favorite way to travel. But one thing you realize when you do this is like, you'll go places and be like, oh man, like we're like on this Thai island, like isn't this cool? And you'll be talking to some other traveler and they'll be like, yeah, this is cool, but like I was in Panama last year, like that's what's up. And then you go to Panama and you're like, whoa, this is cool. And then they're like, no. like Argentina, man. Argentina is like, you know, like it builds and builds and builds like that. So once you get out there, you realize how quickly, like, man, there's so many other places to see. Right here in the back. Good question again. You know, that's tough. I would say actually Argentina. My favorite food is probably just like a really good steak, and Argentina is a little bit on the pricey side, but in basically every little restaurant, every grocery store, you can get like a really perfect ribeye steak for about $2 or $3 just because it's so prevalent there. So I would say personally Argentina would take that.
That's all. If you don't want to stick around for a couple minutes, you can come on up and ask Evan some questions. Mr. Smith, you have the final word.
I need to see these guys down here if you're here. Raja, Spillman, Paulie Antoyushu, Merlo, John Williams, Mike Willett, Brummett, Spahn, Simeon Parker, Jeffy, Keyshawn Jones, Lyle, and Sammy. All right, that's out.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you.
I'm Cheryl and Kayla. Music history and
Oh, wonderful.
music and instrumental music.
Oh, great.
Wonderful.
Oh, thanks so much.
I plan to get your book.
Oh, well, that's really great. Thanks very much. Yeah. Hey, thanks. Yeah. I hope it was all right. I'm not a big public speaker.
Thanks. Mark Griffin.
Hey, thank you very much. Yeah,
Evan Henry Smythe.
Hey, how are you? Good to
nice to
see
be
you.
here. That's great.
Oh, thanks very much. I'm not a huge public speaker, so I'm glad it went all right. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Hey, yeah, thanks.
I've never seen it. Where can I get a copy of your books? Like Amazon or something?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's everywhere.
All right, thank you very much.
Check it out, and check out on page 196. There's an Easter egg about Gilman. You'll see what I mean. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Yeah, really thanks. All right. Hey, how are you?
I'm good, man. That
Yeah.
was a great present.
Oh, thanks very much.
say
Thanks. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
For us all.
All right. Well, thank
I'll
you.
be back a little bit.
Yeah.
I'll be back.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. How's the school year been? Yeah? Okay, that's good to hear. All right.